She bought a deserted prison for 30 cents in broad daylight at a public auction where seasoned real estate investors with deep pockets stood silent, watching her bid on what should have been an incredible opportunity. But nobody else raised their hand. Isabelle Ramsey looked around the crowd of perhaps 50 people gathered outside the Pierce County Administration Building in Ashford Springs, Montana, expecting anyone, to challenge her bid. The auctioneer's gavel hung in the air, waiting. The afternoon sun beat down on the assembled crowd, but nobody moved, nobody breathed. The former Thornfield Correctional Facility sat on 22 acres of land, just 90 minutes outside Billings, complete with administrative buildings, a functioning well system, industrial kitchen facilities, and reinforced concrete structures that could be converted into climate-controlled storage units or even artist lofts. The main building alone was 40,000 square feet. The place needed serious renovation work, certainly, but 30 cents for 22 acres of developed land. The silence stretched longer than it should have, much longer. "Going once," the auctioneer called out, his voice lacking the usual enthusiasm Isabelle had heard at the previous 10 properties. His name tag read Harold Finch, and his hands were visibly shaking as he held the gavel. Isabelle noticed something else profoundly strange. The people in the crowd weren't looking at the large color photographs of Thornfield Prison displayed on the easels beside the podium. They weren't studying their auction catalogs or whispering to each other about the property's potential. They were looking directly at her, not with envy or frustration about losing out on an unbelievable deal, but with something that made her skin crawl. Pity. Deep, genuine pity. As if she'd just signed her own death warrant instead of making the smartest investment of her 32-year-old life. "Going twice," Harold announced, his voice cracking slightly on the second word. An older woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun stepped closer to Isabelle. Her weathered hands clutched a worn leather purse, and her eyes held a sadness that seemed to run bone deep. Her name, Isabelle would later learn, was Dorothea Vance, and she'd lived in Ashford Springs for 73 of her 74 years. "You don't want that place, dear," Dorothea whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of wind rustling through the cottonwood trees lining the parking lot. "Please trust an old woman who knows things. Walk away." But before Isabelle could ask what she meant, before she could ask why everyone was looking at her like she was a condemned prisoner herself, the gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo across the entire parking lot, bouncing off buildings and returning like a gunshot. "Sold," Harold said, his voice hollow, to the young woman in the denim jacket for 30 cents. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. The crowd stood frozen, as if someone had pressed pause on reality itself. Then, like a flock of startled birds, people began dispersing in every direction, not walking, hurrying, some almost running. Within 60 seconds, the crowd of 50 had dwindled to fewer than a dozen stragglers, and those remaining kept their distance, watching Isabelle from across the parking lot, with those same expressions of profound pity. As Isabelle approached the auction table to complete her purchase, she caught fragments of hushed conversations drifting through the warm Montana air. Someone should have stopped her. How could they let this happen again? Nobody's been inside since 2009. Remember what happened to Marcus and that developer from Helena? 16 years that place has sat empty. 16 years for good reason. Harold handed her the deed with trembling hands, his eyes fixed somewhere over her left shoulder, refusing to meet her gaze. The document felt heavier than it should have, as if the paper itself carried weight beyond its physical properties. "Mr. Finch," Isabelle said, "I'd like to know more about the property's history. Why was it abandoned? When did the state close?" "Can't help you," he interrupted, gathering his papers with jerky, nervous movements. "Information's all in the public records, county clerk's office. I just run the auctions. But surely you must know something about—" Harold was already walking away, moving faster than seemed appropriate for a man who had to be in his mid-60s. He climbed into his sedan and drove off without looking back, leaving Isabelle standing alone at the folding table with her deed and a growing sense of unease. That's when she noticed the most unsettling detail of all. Every single person who had attended the auction, perhaps 15 people now remained, was still there. They hadn't left. They stood at various points around the parking lot, leaning against cars, sitting on tailgates, standing in the shade of buildings, all of them watching her, not approaching, not leaving, just watching, waiting to see what she would do next, as if they expected something to happen, something that had happened before to others who'd made the same mistake she'd just made. The warning Isabelle walked to her truck, a 10-year-old Ford Ranger she'd bought, used when she'd moved to Montana 8 months ago to start over after her divorce. As she unlocked the door, Dorothea Vance appeared beside her, moving with surprising speed for a woman her age. "Please," Dorothea said, pressing a folded piece of paper into Isabelle's hand. "Before you go out there, before you set foot in that cursed place, read this. It's all the warning I can give you without—" She glanced nervously over her shoulder at a black Chevrolet Suburban parked across the street. "Without certain people thinking I'm interfering." "Interfering with what?" Isabelle asked, unfolding the paper. But Dorothea was already walking away, moving as quickly as her aged legs would carry her toward an old Buick sedan. Within seconds, she'd started the engine and driven off, leaving Isabelle standing in the parking lot with a piece of notebook paper covered in hasty handwriting. The note read, "Thornfield Prison closed March 15, 2009. Warden was Victor Ashford. He disappeared 3 days before closure. Federal charges pending. $38 million missing. His office on 3rd floor northeast corner. Whatever you find there, you'll have 24 hours before they come. Some want it destroyed. Some want it found. Some want you dead for finding it. Trust no one in Ashford Springs. We've all been paid to forget." A friend who remembers. Isabelle read the note 3 times, her heart beating faster with each reading. Victor Ashford, the same last name as the town. That couldn't be a coincidence. She looked up to find that the watchers had finally begun to leave, climbing into their vehicles and driving away. But the black Suburban that Dorothea had glanced at remained, its windows too darkly tinted to see inside. As Isabelle watched, the driver's window rolled down slightly, just an inch or two, and she caught a glimpse of someone taking photographs of her with a long camera lens. Someone was documenting her purchase. Recording this moment, the window rolled back up, and the Suburban's engine started. But it didn't leave. It simply sat there, idling, waiting. Isabelle climbed into her truck, locked the doors, and sat for a moment trying to process what had just happened. She'd come to this auction looking for a business opportunity, abandoned buildings she could buy cheap, renovate, and flip or rent for profit. It was how she'd planned to rebuild her life after her ex-husband had cleaned out their joint accounts and disappeared to Costa Rica with his 23-year-old assistant. 30 cents for 22 acres should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it felt like she'd just purchased a ticket to something very dangerous. But Isabelle Ramsey hadn't survived a devastating divorce, hadn't rebuilt her credit from nothing, hadn't moved halfway across the country to start over, only to be scared away by cryptic warnings and strange stares. Whatever was at Thornfield Prison, whatever secret had kept it off the market for 16 years, she was going to find it. She started her truck and pulled out of the parking lot. The black Suburban followed at a distance of exactly 3 car lengths, making no effort to hide its presence. The journey to Thornfield, the drive to Thornfield Correctional Facility, took 47 minutes along increasingly deteriorating roads. Isabelle followed the GPS coordinates from the deed, watching as paved county highways gave way to cracked asphalt, then to gravel, then to dirt roads, with potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. The landscape changed too. The rolling grasslands and distant mountains that made Montana beautiful gave way to something darker. The trees grew denser here, mostly lodgepole pines that seemed to crowd the narrow road. The afternoon sun, so bright in Ashford Springs, barely penetrated the canopy here. The black Suburban had disappeared about 20 minutes into the drive, but Isabelle couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. Twice she thought she caught glimpses of vehicles on parallel roads pacing her through the trees. Then the forest opened up, and Thornfield came into view. The prison sat in a cleared area of at least 30 acres, more than the deed had indicated. A 12-foot chain-link fence, topped with razor wire, surrounded the entire complex, though sections had collapsed and rusted through. The main building was a 3-story concrete fortress that looked more like a Cold War-era government facility than a modern correctional center. Narrow windows, heavily barred, stared out like dead eyes. Guard towers stood at each corner, their windows broken, their structures slowly surrendering to weather and time. But what struck Isabelle most was how well preserved it looked, despite 16 years of abandonment. No graffiti covered the walls, no local teenagers had broken in for parties or exploration. The place looked less abandoned and more waiting. The main gate stood open, the chain that had once secured it lying on the ground, corroded but cut deliberately, not broken by weather. Isabelle drove through slowly, her truck's tires crunching on gravel that had been recently disturbed. Fresh tire tracks, multiple vehicles, different sizes, crisscrossed the grounds. People had been here, recently, maybe as recently as this morning. She parked near the main entrance and sat for a moment, studying the building. Every instinct she had screamed at her to turn around and leave. But 30 cents, 22 acres, the potential profit alone. Isabelle grabbed her flashlight and the crowbar she kept in the truck for emergencies, then approached the entrance. The heavy steel door, painted institutional gray and covered with rust stains, stood slightly ajar. Not wide open, just a few inches, as if someone had opened it and then pulled it almost closed again. She pushed, and the door swung inward with a low groan of protesting hinges. But the sound was wrong somehow. The hinges moved too smoothly, too easily for something that should have been frozen with rust. Someone had oiled them, recently. Inside, the air smelled of concrete dust, mildew, and something else, something organic and unpleasant that Isabelle couldn't quite identify. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a long corridor lined with doors. Peeling paint hung from the walls in long strips. Water damage had created abstract patterns on the ceiling tiles, but the floor, surprisingly, was relatively clean. No accumulated debris, no animal droppings, no evidence of weather penetration that should have destroyed the interior over 16 years. It was as if someone had been maintaining this place, cleaning it, preserving it. Isabelle's footsteps echoed as she moved deeper into the building, following signs toward the administrative wing. Her flashlight illuminated abandoned offices, a cafeteria with tables still arranged in rows, a library with empty shelves. Everything looked frozen in time, as if the staff and prisoners had simply vanished one day, leaving everything behind. She found the stairwell and climbed to the third floor, her breathing loud in the silence. The metal stairs rang with each step, announcing her presence to anyone or anything that might be listening. The third-floor corridor stretched ahead into darkness. Northeast corner, Dorothea's note had said. Isabelle counted doors until she found the one marked Warden Victor Ashford. The door was locked, but the wood around the frame had rotted enough that a few solid hits with the crowbar splintered it apart. The door swung open with a shriek of protesting wood. The warden's office was larger than Isabelle had expected, maybe 20 feet square, with windows overlooking the prison yard. A massive oak desk dominated one wall, its surface covered with a thick layer of dust. Filing cabinets lined another wall. A leather executive chair, cracked and dried with age, sat behind the desk. Bookshelves held volumes on criminal justice, correctional theory, and Montana law. But it was the floor that immediately caught her attention. Behind the desk, approximately 4 feet square, the concrete floor had been cut and replaced. The seams were visible, deliberate, precise cuts forming a perfect square. And the concrete within that square was slightly different in color, slightly smoother in texture, suggesting it had been poured years after the original floor was laid. Someone had created a vault, a hiding place, and then sealed it permanently. Isabelle knelt and ran her fingers along the seams. They'd been filled with some kind of industrial epoxy or sealant that had hardened to a consistency stronger than the surrounding concrete. Opening this wouldn't be easy. It would require serious tools, significant time, and considerable effort, which raised an obvious question. If Victor Ashford had hidden something here, something worth creating such an elaborate concealment, why hadn't anyone retrieved it in 16 years? A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. Isabelle froze, her hand still touching the sealed floor, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. She turned off her flashlight and waited in the darkness, listening. Another creak, closer. Someone was definitely in the corridor, moving slowly, deliberately, trying to be quiet. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, crowbar raised, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped directly outside the office. Through the gap between door and frame, Isabelle could see a shadow, someone standing there listening. Just as she was listening, then a voice, male, barely a whisper. "Is someone in there?" Isabelle remained silent, her knuckles white around the crowbar. "I know someone bought this place today," the voice continued, slightly louder now. "I know you're probably in Ashford's office. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to warn you. Whatever's under that floor, it's already cost 6 people their lives. 7, if you count Ashford himself." "Who are you?" Isabelle called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Someone who tried to buy this property 3 years ago. Someone who figured out what's hidden here. Someone who barely escaped with his life." A pause. "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm the developer they whisper about in town. The one who disappeared." "I didn't disappear. I ran. I've been running for 3 years." Isabelle moved to the doorway and looked out. A man stood in the dim hallway light filtering through the barred windows. Asian features, maybe 40 years old, wearing hiking clothes and carrying a backpack. His eyes held the haunted look of someone who'd seen things that changed them fundamentally.
If you're here to warn me, Isabelle said, then warn me. What's under that floor? Marcus Chen stepped closer, and in the better light, Isabelle could see the scar running along his jawline, partially hidden by stubble. A scar that looked like it came from a knife. Victor Ashford's journals, Marcus said quietly. 7 years' worth of detailed entries describing how he stole $38 million from the federal prison system. But that's not what makes them dangerous. What makes them dangerous is that they name everyone who helped him. Guards, administrators, state officials, federal inspectors, judges, prosecutors. Over 40 people, many still in positions of power, all of whom benefited from Ashford's operation. He moved closer to the window, his eyes constantly scanning the prison yard below. Those journals are the only evidence that could bring them all down. And every single one of those 40 people wants to make sure they're never found. They've kept this property off the market for 16 years, through bureaucratic manipulation. When it accidentally went to auction today, they panicked. Right now they're deciding whether to buy you off, threaten you or kill you. And you, Isabelle asked, what do you want? Marcus met her eyes. I want you to understand what you're up against. I opened that floor 3 years ago. Got about halfway through. Then they found out I was here. 4 men came. Professional. They didn't say a word. Just started shooting. I barely made it out alive. He pulled up his shirt, revealing a network of scars across his abdomen. 2 gunshot wounds, collapsed lung, 3 months in a hospital in Canada, under a fake name. I've been moving ever since, staying off the grid, because the moment they find me, I'm dead. Why come back? Isabelle asked. Why risk it? Because I've spent 3 years thinking about those journals, thinking about $38 million. And 40 corrupt officials who got away with it, thinking about Victor Ashford, who they murdered and made look like he'd run away. Marcus's jaw tightened. I came back because I'm tired of running, and because when I saw the auction notice online, I thought maybe, just maybe, if someone actually bought this place legitimately, we'd have a chance to expose them all. From somewhere in the distance, the sound of vehicles approaching echoed across the empty prison grounds. Marcus tensed. They're here, faster than I expected. You need to leave, right now. Who's here? Everyone who wants those journals destroyed. Everyone who wants to make sure you never open that floor. He grabbed her arm. There's a service exit on the ground floor. West side. Your truck is out front. They'll be watching it. I have a motorcycle hidden in the woods, half a mile north. I'm not running, Isabelle said firmly. I legally own this property. I have every right to be here. Legal rights don't matter when you're dead. Marcus shot back. These people have killed before. They'll kill again. Please, we can come back with help, with media attention, with attention, with the sound of vehicles stopped. The sound of vehicles stopped. Doors slammed. Multiple footsteps crunched on gravel. Too late, Marcus whispered, his face going pale. They're already inside.
She bought a deserted prison for 30 cents, then found the secret journals of a $38 million Fugitive Part 2 of 10, the confrontation finale. Previously, Isabelle bought Thornfield Prison for 30 cents and discovered a sealed floor in Warden Victor Ashford's office. Marcus Chen, a developer who barely survived trying to open it 3 years ago, warned her about the deadly forces protecting the hidden journals. Now unknown visitors have arrived at the prison. The footsteps echoed through the empty corridors below, multiple people, moving with military precision. Isabelle counted at least 6 distinct patterns of movement, converging toward the administrative wing. The service exit, Marcus whispered urgently, pulling Isabelle toward the back stairwell. We have maybe 90 seconds. They moved quickly but quietly down the metal stairs, Marcus leading the way with practiced efficiency. But as they reached the 2nd floor landing, voices drifted up from below, more people entering through the service exit Marcus had planned to use as their escape route. They've covered all the exits, Marcus breathed. They planned this. Isabelle's mind raced. Trapped in an abandoned prison with people who'd already killed to protect their secrets. Her truck was surrounded. The building was being systematically cleared. Within minutes they'd be found. The cell blocks, she said suddenly. Hundreds of places to hide. They'll search every cell. Not if we're not in the cells. Isabelle led them to a door marked Maintenance Access and kicked it open. Inside was a narrow shaft containing pipes and electrical conduits, the building's utility infrastructure. Barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, it ran vertically through all 3 floors. "You're insane," Marcus said, but he was already climbing in after her. They descended in darkness, the metal pipes cold under their hands, the smell of rust and stagnant water overwhelming in the confined space. Above them, they heard doors being kicked open, rooms being searched, commands being shouted. 3rd floor clear. Moving to 2nd floor, Isabelle and Marcus reached the ground floor shaft and pushed through a maintenance panel into the boiler room, a vast underground space filled with ancient heating equipment and shadows deep enough to disappear into. "Stay here," Marcus whispered. "Don't move. Don't breathe loud. They'll clear the ground floor and assume we escaped." They pressed themselves into a corner behind a massive boiler, the metal still holding faint warmth from decades-old heat. Minutes felt like hours as footsteps pounded overhead, systematically clearing each room. Then silence. "Ground floor clear. They must have slipped out before we secured the perimeter. Check the woods. They can't have gone far." The footsteps receded, moving outside. Through a small ground-level window, Isabelle watched as flashlight beams swept through the darkness, searching the forest surrounding Thornfield. "They're leaving guards at the exits," Marcus observed. "But they think we've gone. This is our chance." "Chance to do what?" "They'll be watching this place for days." Marcus pulled a small toolkit from his backpack. "We open that floor tonight. Right now, while they're searching outside, we get the journals, photograph every page, and upload them to every news outlet in the country before they realize what we've done. That's suicide. It's justice." Marcus's eyes burned with intensity. "I've spent 3 years running, 3 years looking over my shoulder, 3 years knowing that 40 corrupt officials destroyed lives and got away with it. This is our only chance." Isabelle thought of the black Suburban following her, thought of Dorothea's warning, thought of everyone at that auction looking at her with pity. How long to break through that concrete? With the right tools. 2 hours, maybe 3. Marcus hefted his backpack. "I came prepared this time." They waited 30 more minutes until the search parties moved deeper into the forest, then crept back upstairs using the maintenance shaft. The warden's office was exactly as they'd left it. Empty, dark, the sealed floor waiting. Marcus unpacked a small electric concrete saw, battery-powered and surprisingly quiet. "This will make noise, but less than you'd think. The forest search should cover it." The saw bit into concrete with a low grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent building. Dust filled the air as Marcus worked methodically, cutting along the seams, gradually loosening the sealed section. Isabelle kept watch at the window, tracking the flashlight beams in the forest. They were moving away, spreading out, believing their targets had escaped into the wilderness. After 90 minutes, Marcus had cut through 3 sides of the square. He set the saw aside and pulled out a pry bar, working it into the gap he'd created. "Help me," he grunted. Together they leveraged the concrete section upward. It moved reluctantly, then suddenly gave way, revealing a cavity beneath, a space about 3 feet deep, lined with metal. Inside was a large waterproof case, military-grade, covered in dust but intact. Marcus lifted it out with trembling hands. The case was heavy, substantial. He flipped the latches and opened it. 7 leather-bound journals sat inside, each one labeled with dates spanning 2002 to 2009. Beneath them were USB drives, photographs, and what appeared to be financial ledgers. "This is it," Marcus whispered. "This is everything." Isabelle grabbed the first journal and opened it. Victor Ashford's handwriting was meticulous, detailed, damning. February 12, 2003, Judge Raymond Keller accepted $50,000 to reduce sentences for 3 inmates connected to the Mendoza cartel. This brings his total to $230,000 over 18 months. Page after page of names, dates, amounts, specific crimes. Not just corruption, a complete roadmap of systemic criminal conspiracy reaching from prison guards to state senators. "We need to photograph all of this," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "Every page. Then we upload simultaneously too." A gunshot shattered the window. Both of them dropped to the floor as more shots followed, punching holes in the walls, sending concrete dust and wood splinters flying. The flashlights in the forest had reversed direction, converging back on the prison. They heard the saw. Marcus shouted over the gunfire. "We need to move." Isabelle grabbed 2 of the journals, while Marcus shoved the rest back in the case. They ran for the door as more gunshots echoed through the building. Someone was inside now, shooting from the stairwell, trying to pin them down. "The maintenance shaft," Isabelle yelled. They burst through the maintenance access door and into the narrow vertical tunnel, just as men in tactical gear rounded the corner behind them. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off metal pipes. Isabelle and Marcus descended in controlled chaos, their hands slipping on pipes, their bodies bruised by impacts with the narrow walls. Behind them, someone was climbing into the shaft, pursuing. They hit the boiler room and ran, Marcus clutching the case, Isabelle gripping the journals. The basement had multiple exits, old coal chutes, ventilation shafts, doors to underground tunnels that had once connected different prison buildings. "This way." Marcus led them through a low tunnel barely 4 feet high, forcing them to crouch run through darkness. Behind them, flashlight beams and shouting voices echoed. The tunnel emerged at the old power plant, a separate building 50 yards from the main prison. They burst out into the night air and ran for the tree line. Gunfire erupted again, bullets kicking up dirt around them. But they'd gained distance, and darkness was their ally now. They crashed into the forest, branches whipping their faces, roots threatening to trip them with every step. Marcus led them to a small clearing where a motorcycle sat hidden under camouflage netting. "Get on." The engine roared to life, absurdly loud in the night. Isabelle climbed on behind Marcus, still clutching the journals as he gunned the throttle. They exploded out of the forest onto a logging road, the motorcycle's headlight cutting through darkness. Behind them, vehicles started up, giving chase. "Hold on," Marcus shouted, taking the bike into turns that seemed impossible, using every bit of the logging road's terrain to their advantage. 20 minutes of breakneck riding brought them to a small airstrip, nothing more than a grass field, with a windsock and a small hangar. A Cessna sat waiting, engine already running, pilot visible in the cockpit. "You planned this,"